The big, quiet courtroom made of shiny white marble was very still, so still that even a whisper could echo. This was the Supreme Court, the most important courtroom in the whole country. Usually, everything was serious and quiet here. But today, something different was happening. A judge named Coney Barrett looked at a man standing in the middle of the room. She said with a smirk, "Mr. Reeves, this is the United States Supreme Court, not a movie set." Everyone in the room gasped. You see, the man standing there was Keanu Reeves. He's an actor. He plays heroes in movies like John Wick and Neo from The Matrix. But today, he wasn't playing a role. He was wearing a plain black suit, no movie costume, no special effects. He came to speak about something very important: fairness. He had been invited to talk about a confusing rule called civil forfeiture. That's when the government takes away someone's house, car, or money, even if that person didn't do anything wrong. Keanu was there to help the judges understand why that was unfair. But Judge Barrett didn't treat him kindly. She talked down to him, almost like she was laughing at him. Still, Keanu didn't get mad. He didn't shout. He simply reached into his bag and pulled out something very special, a tiny, old, beat-up copy of the U.S. Constitution. That's the most important set of rules in America, and his copy was full of notes and sticky tabs. It looked like he'd read it 1,000 times. Everyone in the room watched closely. The Chief Justice moved in his seat. Another judge, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, raised her eyebrows in surprise. Keanu's voice was calm but strong. He said, "Your Honor, I know this isn't Hollywood, but the Constitution belongs to everyone, including people who don't wear fancy robes." That made the room go totally silent. Not because it was rude, but because it was true. People started listening in a different way after that. Judge Barrett asked sharply, "Do you have anything real to add, Mr. Reeves?" Keanu didn't get upset. He just opened his book and said, "Yes, Your Honor." And it starts with a letter from James Madison, written in January 1788. That name sounded familiar to everyone. James Madison was one of the people who helped write the Constitution. Keanu brought more than just quotes from textbooks. He brought old letters, notes, and his own careful research. He had read real documents at the Library of Congress. These were things even some lawyers had never seen. Some people in the audience couldn't believe it. Was an actor about to teach judges something new about the Constitution? That's when things started to change. People in the courtroom leaned forward. Law clerks whispered to each other. Reporters furiously scribbled notes. Everyone realized that Keanu wasn't just there to speak, he was there to make people think. He explained how the government was using the civil forfeiture rule unfairly, especially against poor people and people who didn't have lawyers. Judge Barrett interrupted again. "That's just your opinion," she said. "This is the law, not a place for emotions." Keanu didn't raise his voice. He smiled gently and said, "Respectfully, Your Honor, the people who wrote the Constitution believed that freedom was emotional. They cried and bled for it." Now the room didn't just fall quiet. It felt holy, like something powerful had been said. Keanu had flipped the courtroom. Suddenly, people were asking, shouldn't anyone be allowed to speak the truth, even if they aren't a lawyer? Even if they're an actor? That night, the internet exploded with videos, memes, and quotes. People shared the moment Keanu said, "They bled for it," over and over. Students turned his words into ringtones. Talk shows debated the whole thing. But Keanu didn't join the party. He was sitting alone in his hotel room, quietly sipping tea. His tea was cold, but he didn't care. He wasn't thinking about applause or headlines. He was thinking about Maria Lopez. Maria was a 72-year-old grandma from Arizona. Her nephew had come over to visit, and the police found a tiny bit of marijuana in her driveway. They didn't charge Maria with a crime. But they still took her house away. That's the case Keanu was talking about. He didn't go to court to be famous. He went because he wanted to help people like Maria. While filming movies, Keanu had secretly been taking classes about the Constitution. He didn't tell many people. He just studied hard, late at night, in between acting jobs. He had hoped his writing would be enough, but when the court invited someone to speak and Maria's family couldn't go, Keanu stepped up. And something magical happened. People everywhere, especially students, started seeing themselves in him. "If he can speak there," one girl tweeted, "maybe we can too." Judge Barrett wasn't happy. She said Keanu's speech was too emotional and not serious enough. But civil rights groups defended him. They said his writing had more than 40 footnotes and 6 historical documents. The most surprising support came from another judge, Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She said out loud, "Keanu brought both legal knowledge and real compassion. That's not just okay, it's important." Back in Los Angeles, Keanu tried to go back to normal. He started filming a small movie he was helping to pay for. But things had changed. Schools across America started using his courtroom speech in their classes. Still, he felt heavy inside. He didn't want the case to be about him. He wanted it to be about Maria and others like her. What made him saddest was when Judge Barrett had said, "This isn't a movie set." That wasn't just rude, it was her way of saying, "You don't belong here." That night, Keanu wrote a letter to Maria. He told her she inspired him. He said, "They took your house, but your courage helped shake the Supreme Court." As he finished writing, his phone buzzed. A message popped up from a number he didn't know. It said, "Reeves, you caught the court off guard. But tomorrow, Barrett won't hold back." Keanu looked at the message. Then he typed back, "Neither will I." Dove, the next day. The next morning, the court was even more crowded than before. People had stood in the rain all night just to get inside. Reporters were outside. Security guards were everywhere. Inside, Keanu walked alone to the front. He wore the same suit. He held his briefcase tightly. No movie team. No bodyguards. Just Keanu, ready to speak again. Judge Barrett sat waiting. She didn't smirk this time. She just stared. She tapped her pen like a ticking clock. Keanu spoke clearly. "Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court." He said he wanted to talk about 3 big problems with the rule that had hurt Maria. Problems that were not just about rules, but about what's right and wrong. Barrett interrupted him again. "We care about the law, not feelings," she snapped. Keanu nodded. "Then let's talk about the law," he said. He pulled out papers and showed real cases from the past. Cases where the court had said people deserve a fair chance to speak before the government takes their stuff. Another judge, Justice Kagan, leaned forward. Even Justice Clarence Thomas, who hardly speaks, picked up his pen. Barrett tried again to trip him up. She said, "What about that one case where the court said the government could take someone's stuff even if they were innocent?" Keanu smiled gently. "That case was a mistake," he said. "Even another judge back then said it was unfair. And the people who wrote our Constitution would agree with him." He pulled out a letter James Madison had written in 1788. In it, Madison warned that if the government could take things from people without a trial, freedom would slowly disappear. The room gasped. Then something very surprising happened. Another judge, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, asked, "Mr. Reeves, did you do all this research yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor," Keanu said. "I studied at Howard University. I didn't take official classes. But I worked with professors and spent 2 years in the Library of Congress." Nobody could believe it. Even the judges were starting to listen differently. And Keanu? He was just getting started. Keanu Reeves sat calmly in front of the judges at the Supreme Court. It was a big day, and he had already made a big impact the previous day with his powerful words. He knew today would be just as important, but he had to be careful. The courtroom was tense. The justices, who usually spoke in big legal terms, were now listening to a Hollywood actor, someone with no law degree, argue about the Constitution. Keanu had already stunned the courtroom once by saying that the law was not just for the rich and powerful but for the people. It wasn't about his fame. It was about the truth and protecting the rights of every citizen. Judge Barrett, one of the Supreme Court justices, had tried to push Keanu down. She thought he was out of place, but Keanu wasn't about to back down. He came from a place of belief and justice, not just performance. He believed that the law was meant to protect the vulnerable, not the wealthy or powerful people who had the resources to bend it to their will. The whole courtroom was watching closely, waiting to see how this would play out. Keanu began speaking, his voice firm and strong. "Your Honor," he started, "I do not stand here to challenge your authority. I stand to remind you of your purpose." His words felt like a warning. He wanted the judges to remember that the Constitution was made to protect all citizens, not just those who were rich or powerful. Keanu held up a photo that had been given to him by a woman named Maya. It showed her grandmother, Maria Lopez, standing in front of her house. The house had been taken away from her by the government because of something called civil forfeiture. Maria wasn't a criminal, just a hard-working grandmother. But her home had been taken without fair process. And Keanu believed that was wrong. As Keanu showed the photo to the judges, you could feel the room change. Even though Keanu wasn't a lawyer, his words spoke louder than any fancy legal talk. He wasn't just talking about a law, he was talking about a person, about a grandmother who lost her home unfairly. It was personal. It was real. Judge Barrett looked at Keanu with her eyes narrowed. She didn't seem happy with what he was saying. "Mr. Reeves," she asked, "are you suggesting this court is biased against the powerless?" Keanu didn't flinch. "I'm not suggesting it," he said calmly. "I'm stating it." There was silence in the room. Everyone could feel the weight of his words. Even the other justices seemed to pause. Keanu wasn't just trying to win an argument. He was fighting for justice. For the people who had no voice. For people like Maria. The tension in the courtroom grew. Some of the judges shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable. Keanu wasn't just another person trying to prove a point. He was speaking up for those who had been forgotten by the system. The law was supposed to protect everyone, but sometimes it only protected the people who could afford to fight for it. Keanu continued, his voice steady. "This court has upheld laws that punish the innocent, excuse the powerful, and expand the reach of government over private lives. That isn't balanced. That isn't justice. That's abandonment." A gasp echoed through the room. A few people even started to applaud, but the officers quickly silenced them. Judge Barrett's face turned pale, and she didn't know how to respond. Her authority was slipping. She had thought Keanu was just an actor, someone who couldn't possibly understand the law. But now, it seemed he understood it better than some of the most experienced lawyers in the country. Keanu wasn't finished. He was just getting started. The founders wrote liberty and justice into the Constitution. These words weren't meant to be divided. They were written in ink, but sealed in blood. His words hung in the air like a heavy truth. Everyone in the courtroom, from the justices to the reporters, was struck by what Keanu had said. This wasn't just about laws. This was about what the country stood for, what it was supposed to protect. It was about fairness and justice for all people. Outside the courtroom, people were starting to cheer. News cameras were everywhere. Keanu had become a symbol of what was right, what was fair. No longer was he just the guy from the movies. Now, he was someone who had changed the conversation about justice in America. But Keanu didn't care about the applause. He didn't care about the cameras. He was focused on something much bigger. He had come to stand up for people like Maria Lopez and for anyone who had been treated unfairly by the system. He wasn't looking for fame. He was looking for real change. As the court session ended, Keanu quietly gathered his papers and nodded respectfully to the judges. But Judge Barrett didn't respond. She sat frozen, her face betraying the shock and anger she felt. She had been outmatched, outspoken, and she knew it. The next day, the news was filled with headlines about Keanu. Keanu Reeves redefines justice, they said. Judge Barrett left speechless. People were amazed by what Keanu had said. Lawyers and professors from all over the country were talking about it. Some of them agreed with Keanu, saying that his argument about the Constitution was well thought out and better researched than some cases they had seen. College students were asking their professors to teach about what Keanu had said. But even as the world celebrated Keanu's victory, there were whispers behind closed doors in the Supreme Court. Judge Barrett wasn't happy. She had lost the argument, but worse, she had lost control of the story. Her authority had been shaken. One night, after the court session, Keanu was back in his hotel room when he got a call. It was from Chief Justice Alexander, the leader of the Supreme Court. At first, Keanu hesitated, not sure what to expect. But he answered. "Mr. Reeves," Alexander said, "your presence here has caused more debate in these walls than any case we've heard in the last 5 years." Keanu paused. "Is that a good thing?" he asked. Alexander didn't answer right away. There was silence on the other end of the line. But Keanu knew that things were changing. The public was starting to see the truth. The law wasn't just for the rich and powerful. It was meant to protect everyone. And Keanu was going to keep fighting for that. He wouldn't stop until the system started working for the people, not just the powerful. The next day, Keanu woke up to more news stories, more people talking about what he had said in court. But he stayed quiet. He wasn't interested in the spotlight. He was focused on the bigger fight, the fight for justice, for fairness, for every person who had ever been ignored or silenced by the system. Keanu Reeves had gone to the Supreme Court as an actor, but he had left as a symbol of something far greater, something that reminded everyone of what justice was really about. Keanu Reeves had always been a famous actor, known for his action movies and kind-hearted personality. However, one day he did something that no one expected. He entered a court and made a big impact, not as an actor, but as a citizen who cared deeply about justice. It all started when Keanu was contacted by a woman named Maria Lopez. She had lost her home in a way that seemed unfair. The government had taken it from her without a trial, without proving she had done anything wrong. Maria was just one of many people who had been affected by this kind of law, called civil forfeiture, where the government could take property without charging someone with a crime. Keanu was moved by her story. He started researching the law and learning about the Constitution, the document that protects people's rights. He spent a lot of time reading about how the government should treat people fairly and not take away their homes or things without a good reason. Keanu decided to do something bold. He wrote a legal brief, which is a kind of written argument that lawyers submit to the court, explaining why the law was wrong. He took his findings to the Supreme Court of the United States, the highest court in the country. He argued that the government should not be allowed to take someone's property unless it could prove they did something wrong, and even then, there should be a trial to make sure it was fair. In the courtroom, Keanu spoke calmly and clearly, even though he wasn't a lawyer. His words were powerful, and his arguments were strong. When he finished, everyone was quiet, amazed at what he had said. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who was the leader of the court, was so impressed that he said, "I've assigned myself to write the majority opinion," meaning he would write the decision explaining why the court ruled in favor of Keanu's argument. 3 weeks later, the court made a big decision. They ruled in favor of the petitioners, which meant the government couldn't take someone's property without a good reason. This new rule was called Keanu's test, And it was a three-part rule. The government would now have to show that the property was connected to a crime, that the owner knew about the crime, and that the government had a good reason for taking the property. What made this ruling even more special was that the court included quotes from Keanu's speech in their written opinion, not just once but 4 times. They even added a note thanking him for his help in writing the argument. It was clear that Keanu's words had made a big difference. The decision didn't just change the law, it changed the way people thought about the law. Maria Lopez, the woman who had lost her home, got it back. Keanu flew to Arizona to return her house keys to her, and he did it quietly, without any cameras or reporters. Maria was so grateful, and she hugged him and said, "You didn't just speak for me, you reminded me I mattered." It was a simple but powerful moment that showed how one person's voice could make a difference. After the decision, a lot of people started talking about civil forfeiture and how it was being used unfairly. Lawmakers, or people who make the laws, began to change the rules in many states to follow the new standards set by the Supreme Court. Civil rights groups filed lawsuits to help people get their property back. In Philadelphia, where the case had started, the city council voted to return homes and businesses that had been taken by the government unfairly. Maria Lopez's old house became a symbol of the fight for justice. It was painted yellow with a mural of a woman holding the Constitution, and at the bottom, the words, "We the people," were written in bold letters. Even though Keanu had become famous for his role in the court case, he didn't want to be in the spotlight. He turned down offers for book deals, TV shows, and even movies based on his courtroom fight. He didn't want to make money from it. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. He said, "I didn't fight for branding. I fought for a woman who lost her house without being charged with a crime. That should never happen in America. Period." But even though Keanu didn't want fame, people still saw how special he was. At Harvard Law School, he was invited to give the graduation speech. He stood up and told the students, "I'm not here because I'm smarter than anyone. I'm here because I listened. I listened to people who didn't have lawyers. I listened to the Constitution, not as a legal document, but as a promise." He reminded everyone that justice is not about being the best lawyer or having the best degree. It's about doing the right thing and helping people. His speech was so powerful that it got millions of views online. People started calling him a hero, but he didn't want to be called that. He just wanted to help. At a big meeting in Georgetown, Judge Barrett, one of the justices who had disagreed with him in the past, came up to him and said, "I may not agree with Mr. Reeves on everything, but I underestimated him. And that was my mistake." She didn't apologize, but everyone knew she was admitting that she had been wrong about him. Keanu's efforts didn't stop after the case. He began visiting schools and meeting with young people who wanted to help make the world a better place. He talked to them about justice and fairness, asking them what justice meant to them. He didn't try to tell them what to think. He wanted to hear their ideas. Keanu knew that the law wasn't just for lawyers or judges, it was for everyone. It was meant to protect the rights of all people, not just the powerful. He worked hard on a new project, a big study about property rights and the government's power. He wasn't doing it for money or fame, but to help create a better future. He wanted to make sure that people in the future would know how to protect their rights and stop the government from taking their property unfairly. One day, Keanu was walking through a bookstore in Brooklyn when a group of young law students saw him. They didn't ask for selfies or try to get his autograph. They just stood there silently until one of them said, "I dropped out of law school 2 years ago, but after hearing your argument, I decided to reapply." Keanu smiled and said, "Then finish it. We need you." Keanu didn't want to be a famous hero. He just wanted to make sure people remembered the most important thing, that justice belongs to everyone. And as he traveled around, giving quiet talks and listening to people, he showed that one person, even if they aren't a lawyer or a judge, can make a huge difference in the world. Even though Keanu didn't want to be called a hero, many people thought he was. He had changed the law, helped people get their homes back, and inspired a whole new generation of people who wanted to fight for justice. People in the community, including those who had never believed in the law, started to think that maybe, just maybe, the law could work for them, too. Keanu never wore a judge's robe or became a lawyer. But what he did wear was honesty, kindness, and a deep care for people who needed help. His fight for justice wasn't about fame or awards. It was about doing what was right, and that's what made him a true hero. 1 year after the court case, things had changed across the country. Laws were rewritten. People who had lost their homes were getting them back. The Keanu generation, as some called it, was growing. Young people, especially law students, were inspired by what Keanu had done. They wanted to help people, not just become famous or rich. They believed that justice was for everyone, not just the powerful. Keanu's story wasn't just a story about one man making a big difference. It was a story about what happens when people listen to each other, when they care about fairness, and when they fight for what's right. Keanu had reminded everyone that the Constitution wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a promise that belongs to every single person. And so, Keanu's journey ended the same way it had started, quietly. He was invited to a small meeting in Newark, New Jersey, to talk to local people about justice. There were no cameras, no spotlight, just a small room full of people who needed to hear his message. After he spoke, there was a long round of applause. It wasn't loud, but it was heartfelt. People knew that Keanu had seen them, heard them, and cared about them. A man in the back of the room, a janitor still wearing his work clothes, walked up to Keanu and said, "You made me believe the law might actually be for people like us." Keanu smiled and shook his hand, replying, "It always was. We just forgot how to make them listen." And that's the heart of Keanu's story. It wasn't just that he won a big case. It was that he reminded everyone that justice isn't just for judges and lawyers. It's for people. And if we speak up, if we tell the truth, we can make a difference, no matter who we are. If you liked this story, tell me in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more fun adventures and mysteries. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.